happened in Georgia in last elections, in October last year, and what happened just a few days ago in Moldova, in Moldovan parliament, clearly changes the equation. And I would say at this certain moment, it is a setback for our European choice and for Europe's new horizons. It is a clear setback because big money was poured into Georgian elections, and the government that did all the reforms for the last 8 years, because of this financial manipulations and very big money in a country where PPP per capita is still around 6,000 US dollars, certainly played its decisive role. And as a result, we got into a situation when things are getting much more unclear, and there are many questions asked, like asked at this conference. And a few days ago in Moldova, exactly the same scenario. Now again, money entering the Moldovan politics this time, again from the same destination, from the same origin, and again with the same goal to unsettle the balance. And again, the result that government of our friend and a member of this family, Prime Minister Filat, was deposed, and again, Moldova's perspective for Vilnius became much more uncertain. And that's something that is reality. We have now this kind of situations and this kind of heavy pressures. In Georgia, in Moldova, we clearly have attempts to undermine independent-minded foreign policy of other countries of partnership, like Azerbaijan. And we see very much these attitudes of the same kind of movements in some other directions. And this is something that makes it very difficult for short term for pro-European forces in those countries. But on the other hand, I still remain very optimistic about long-term future for our countries. What we need to maintain now is not just declarations and positions. What we need to maintain is, in those countries, we need to maintain democratic system of government. Obviously, what we see as a pattern whenever this kind of money takes over is attempt to monopolize and get control over judiciary, over media, over local government, over the whole political system. If we can keep it intact, then in the conditions of democracy, in the conditions that there is no other alternative for our nations but Europe, I think things should be taken care of and we'll continue our movement. And because of that, I'm deeply convinced that we, in Georgia and other places, we need to progress further in the European direction, no matter who would be in the government or not, provided that there is clear guidelines, what should be respected, what are the rules of the game. Because we don't have a single constituency, say in my country, that would even doubt whether Europe is relevant and whether we have other alternative but Europe. And that's a very powerful instrument for us, but also for our friends Europe-wide.
Going back to this eastern neighborhood, there is a collateral damage done by the crisis which causes the weakening of our eastern policy. We are losing Ukraine. We never had any chance in Belarus, and I'm saying that to Ms. Milinkevich behind me. We are losing Georgia, and we are losing Moldova since a few days with the same perspective. So maybe in certain aspects, the situation in your country, President Saakashvili, is special because the majority of the population and so forth, they are pro-European. But there's something in common in all those countries. You still confirm that preaching the democratic values in our eastern neighborhood is the right policy. But how would you comment the situation where those democratic values put into practice by governments like yours, like Filat's, like Orange in Ukraine before, are leading towards the counter-revolutionaries like regions in Ukraine, like Lupu and communists in Moldova, like Ivanishvili in Georgia, that they are using these democratic freedoms to overrun contradiction in that democracy leads to its self-liquidation in eastern space? What guarantees do we have if we were to follow your recipe, which you just spoke to us from the rostrum, that democracy in hands of non-democrats like Ivanishvili and Yanukovych and whoever will take a communist government tomorrow in Moldova will guide those countries to Europe? I doubt whether you are right, that democracy in the hands of non-democrats will guide those countries towards Europe, towards modernization, and so forth.
I'm coming from Latvia, and I can compare Georgia then and Georgia now, and I would say it's much better country, and these reforms which you provided, these are very important reforms. So, and your personal input, as I know, is a very big one. During these years, I'm 9 years in European Parliament, I learned many Georgian officials which are really competent and good people. So how, under these circumstances with new government, what is their destiny, how they are treated?
That you're facing. And it seems to me that this is a shared problem which is not really well understood in the pre-2004 European countries. And the problem as I see it, this is certainly what we have in Hungary, is the former nomenclatura. The former nomenclatura which doesn't give up. I think many of us thought in 89, 1991 there's a democratic revolution and then everything would move in a democratic direction. And it seems to me that this is not what has happened. The members of the former nomenclatura have not disappeared. They continue to exercise whatever power they can, all too often contrary to both the spirit and the letter of democracy. And my own feeling about this is that unless they're rooted out radically, they constitute a Turkish type of deep state. They remain at the various levels which actually hinder, obstruct democracy. Now, it seems to me, and I suspect that this is what you were saying, but I'd like to hear your views on this, is that rooting out this neo-nomenclatura, and the fascinating thing is that it keeps being reproduced. 20 years after the events, they're still there. This requires, it is a long-term process, and I think requires decisive measures. These don't necessarily gain the approval of some people in the European Union. I'm thinking especially of the left, which frequently has its allies in the neo-nomenclatura. I would have thought solidarity points in the opposite direction towards more understanding, but certainly our experience in Hungary is exactly the contrary. And I just wondered what your take on this was, how you see what the EU 15, the former member states, think about the kind of processes that you launched, to what extent you understand the problem in the way that we do in Hungary.